Story outline. Bound by Stars. Part 1. The Sentence. 1,200 words. Main characters. Marcus Webb, 28-year-old human pilot. Impulsive and proud Sylvana Theron, 61-year-old Velothian diplomat. Cold and calculating plot. Marcus crashes on Velotha Prime and faces execution. Sylvana claims him through an ancient marriage law to prevent war. Part 2. The Estate, 1,200 words. Main characters. Marcus Webb Sylvana, Theron Torin. Sylvana's estranged younger brother plot. Marcus adjusts to life in Sylvana's isolated mountain estate. They begin reluctant conversations that reveal hidden depths in both. Part 3. The Festival, 1,200 words. Main characters. Marcus Webb Sylvana Theron, Magistrate Corvus Minor. Political rival who questions their marriage. Plot. At the Crystal Ascension Festival, Marcus defends Sylvana publicly. Their forced proximity sparks unexpected chemistry. Part 4. The Truth, 1,200 words. Main characters. Marcus Webb Sylvana. Theron plot. Sylvana reveals why she saved. Marcus. She's dying from a rare condition. Marcus chooses to stay, not as a prisoner, but by choice. Part 5. The Choice, 1,200 words. Main characters. Marcus Webb Sylvana. Theron Ambassador Price, Minor. Earth Representative Offering. Marcus Freedom plot. Earth negotiates Marcus's release. But he must choose between freedom and the woman he's grown to love. He chooses her. Part 1. The sentence the metal restraints cut into Marcus. Webb's wrists as the guards forced him to his knees. The floor of the Velothian Justice Chamber felt like ice against his skin, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with hostility. Around him, crystalline walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that hurt his eyes if he stared too long. Marcus Webb of Earth, the magistrate's voice echoed through the vast chamber, each syllable crisp and unforgiving. You stand accused of violating sovereign Velothian airspace, unauthorized planetary entry, and theft of classified atmospheric data. Marcus lifted his chin, refusing to show the fear clawing at his insides. His cargo hauler had been caught in a solar flare, not his fault and the emergency. Landing protocols had brought him down on this forsaken planet. The data they claimed he'd stolen? That was just his ship's automatic environmental scans. I didn't steal anything, he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. My ship malfunctioned. It was an accident. The magistrate, a tall Velothian with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that glowed faint amber, leaned forward. Intent is irrelevant. The violation occurred. The penalty is death by molecular dispersion. Marcus's stomach dropped. He'd heard about molecular dispersion, basically being torn apart, atom by atom, while fully conscious. It took hours. There must be another option, he said, hating how desperate he sounded. A fine? Imprisonment? I'll work off whatever. There is no negotiation. The magistrate cut him off. However, Velothian law does permit one alternative. He paused, his luminous eyes scanning the assembled officials. Should a citizen of sufficient rank claim responsibility through bonding? Bonding. Marcus had read about that in the cultural briefings Velothian marriage, essentially, but with legal implications that made human marriage look like a casual handshake. No one will claim a human criminal, one of the officials muttered, loud enough for Marcus to hear. The disgrace alone, I will claim him. The voice came from the back of the chamber, low and controlled. Every Velothian in the room turned, and Marcus craned his neck to see who had spoken. She emerged from the shadows like a blade being drawn tall, elegant and utterly imposing. Her skin had the characteristic shimmer of all Velothians, but hers held undertones of silver that caught the light with every movement. Her hair, pure white and cut severely at her shoulders, framed a face that was all sharp angles and aristocratic features. She wore robes of deep violet that marked her as someone important, and the way the other Velothians straightened at her approach told Marcus everything he needed to know about her status. "Sylvana Theron," the magistrate said, and Marcus detected something in his toned surprise, maybe even fear. "This is highly irregular." "I invoke the right of salvage," she said, her voice carrying absolute authority, "as is my privilege under our oldest laws." The magistrate's amber eyes narrowed. "You would bind yourself to a human? You who has rejected every suitable match offered by the council for 3 decades. "My personal choices are not subject to council approval," Sylvana replied coolly. "The law is clear. I have the rank, the resources, and the right. Do you challenge this?" A tense silence filled the chamber. Marcus watched the magistrate's face, saw the calculation happening behind those glowing eyes. Whatever this woman's status, it was enough to make even the justice system hesitate. "Very well," the magistrate said finally, though his tone suggested he was anything but pleased. "Marcus Webb, do you accept the claim of bonding with Sylvana Theron? Be aware that refusal means immediate execution." Marcus looked up at the woman who had just offered to save his life. She was old not by Velothian standards, maybe, but she had to be at least 60 in human years. Her face showed lines around her eyes and mouth, marks of age that Velothians apparently couldn't completely avoid despite their longer lifespans. She was studying him with the same clinical detachment someone might use when examining a piece of machinery. "What's the catch?" Marcus asked, his throat dry. "The catch," Sylvana said, "is that you will belong to me under Velothian law. You will live where I dictate, follow the conditions I establish, and represent my household in all matters. In exchange, you keep your life, and Earth maintains its trade agreements with Velotha Prime. So I'm a political bargaining chip. You are many things, Marcus Webb. But right now, you are a man with a choice. Death or life with restrictions." Marcus closed his eyes. He thought of Earth, of his sister who depended on the money he sent home, of the sky above his childhood home, and the freedom of space travel. All of that would be gone, but at least he'd be alive. "I accept," he said, the words tasting like copper in his mouth. The magistrate's expression soured, but he nodded. "The bond is recognized. Marcus Webb is hereby remanded to the custody of Sylvana Theron. His crimes are transferred to her responsibility. This court is adjourned." The restraints on Marcus's wrists released with a hiss. He stood slowly, rubbing the raw skin, and found Sylvana watching him with those unsettling silver-tinged eyes. "Come," she said, turning without waiting to see if he'd follow. "We have much to discuss, and I prefer to do so in private." Marcus followed because he had no choice, walking 3 steps behind the stranger who had just become his wife. Around them, Velothian officials whispered and stared, their glowing eyes tracking every movement. He caught fragments of their conversations. Disgrace, desperation, the fallen diplomat, human contamination. So she was a pariah among her own people. Somehow that didn't make him feel any better. They left the justice chamber through a side exit, entering a corridor of smooth crystal that refracted light into rainbow patterns. Sylvana's stride was long and confident, and Marcus had to hurry to keep up. "Where are we going?" He asked. "To my transport, then to my estate in the northern highlands. You will find it remote, but adequately equipped for human needs." "Remote," Marcus echoed. "You mean isolated?" "I prefer the term private." She didn't slow her pace or turn to look at him. "I do not care for crowds or the vapid politics of Velothian society." "Then why save me?" "This whole bonding thing is going to bring you attention, isn't it? Questions?" Sylvana stopped abruptly, and Marcus nearly collided with her back. She turned to face him, and for the first time, he saw something beyond the cold authority in her expression. Something that might have been exhaustion, or perhaps calculation. Because, Marcus Webb, she said quietly, sometimes one must accept temporary discomfort for a long-term necessity. You serve a purpose. What purpose? Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. You will understand in time. For now, know this. I did not save you out of kindness, and I do not expect gratitude. What I expect is cooperation and discretion. Provide those, and your life here will be tolerable. Defy me, and you will discover that there are fates worse than molecular dispersion. With that cheerful promise, she turned and continued walking, leaving Marcus to follow in the wake of the woman who now owned him in every legal sense. The woman who was 33 years his senior, who lived in isolation, and who had her own mysterious reasons for binding herself to a human criminal. Marcus had survived crash landings, solar flares, and now a Velothian trial. But as he watched Sylvana Theron's straight back and measured steps, he wondered if he'd survive her. The transport that carried them from the capital was small and sleek, clearly designed for a single passenger. Marcus sat in the cramped secondary seat that Sylvana had configured from what appeared to be storage space. Watching the landscape of Velotha Prime transform beneath them, the crystalline spires of the city gave way to rolling plains of violet, grass that rippled like water in the wind. Then came forests of trees with black bark and leaves that glowed softly in the dimming light. Finally, as the sun began its descent, casting everything in shades of amber, and deep purple mountains rose before them. Jagged and imposing, Sylvana piloted in silence, her hands moving across the controls with practiced precision. Marcus studied her profile, trying to understand the woman who had appended his life. Her face was composed, almost serene, but her eyes held a sharpness that suggested her mind was constantly calculating, analyzing, planning. How long have you lived alone? He asked, breaking the silence. 17 years, she replied without looking at him. Since I resigned my position with the diplomatic corps. Resigned or forced out? Now she did glance at him, one silver eyebrow arched. You are bold for someone in your position. I figure I'm already owned by you. Might as well understand my owner. Something flickered in her expression, not quite amusement, but close. I resigned. The circumstances, however, ensured I would never be welcomed back. Before Marcus could press further, the transport began its descent. The estate came into view, and Marcus felt his breath catch despite himself. It wasn't what he'd expected. Instead of some ostentatious mansion, Sylvana's home was built directly into the mountainside, a structure of dark stone and crystal that seemed to grow organically from the rock itself. Waterfalls cascaded on either side, their spray catching the fading light and creating perpetual rainbows. The architecture was elegant but austere, beautiful in a cold, untouchable way. Rather like its owner, Marcus thought. The transport settled onto a landing platform that jutted from the cliff face. As they disembarked, the wind hit Marcus like a physical force, carrying scents he couldn't identify sharp and clean, with an underlying sweetness that made his head spin. The atmosphere here is thinner than at sea level, Sylvana said, noting his disorientation. Your body will adjust within a few days. Come. She led him through an entrance that opened at her approach, the door seeming to melt into the walls. Inside, the temperature was more moderate and the air easier to breathe. The interior matched the exterior, minimalist and elegant, with furniture that looked carved from single pieces of stone and crystal formations that served as both decoration and light sources. Your quarters, Sylvana said, opening a door to reveal a room that was surprisingly comfortable. The bed looked large enough for his human frame, and he spotted what appeared to be a bathroom through another doorway. I had it prepared after the trial was announced. The environmental controls are here, she indicated a panel, and should already be set for human optimal ranges. Marcus stepped inside, running his hand along the smooth wall. You planned this. Before you even saw me, I knew a human would be tried this cycle. Your species has a regrettable tendency toward reckless navigation near our borders. She paused in the doorway. I also knew someone would need to claim you to prevent the political complications your death would cause. I simply ensured I was that someone. Why you, though? Surely there were others who could. There were not, she cut him off, her tone suddenly sharp. No one else would bind themselves to a human. The prejudice runs deep, Marcus Webb. To most Velothians, your species is viewed as chaotic, short-lived, and culturally inferior, claiming you would be social suicide for anyone still engaged with Velothian society. But not for you, because you're already exiled. I prefer the term self-isolated. She turned to leave, then paused. The nutrition station is in the central chamber. I have programmed it with human dietary requirements. You have freedom to move throughout the estate, though I would advise against venturing outside until you've acclimated. How considerate of my jailer. Sylvana's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I am not your jailer, Marcus. I am your bonded partner under law. There is a difference, though I do not expect you to appreciate it yet. She left without another word. The door sliding shut behind her got Marcus, explored his quarters thoroughly, looking for weaknesses, exits, anything he could use. But the room, comfortable as it was, offered no obvious escape routes. The window looked out over a sheer drop of hundreds of meters to jagged rocks below. The door wasn't locked, but where would he go? Eventually, hunger drove him out. He found the central chamber Sylvana had mentioned, a large, open space with crystal formations growing from the floor and ceiling, meeting in the middle to form natural pillars. The nutrition station was easy to identify, its interface displaying symbols he couldn't read until he touched it, and the screen shifted to English. He ordered something that claimed to be similar to chicken and was pleasantly surprised when the result was actually edible. As he ate, he explored the chamber, noting the sparse furnishings and complete absence of personal touches. No art, no photographs, nothing that suggested who Sylvana Theron actually was beneath the cold exterior. Then he noticed an opening to another room, partially concealed by shadows. Curiosity overriding caution, Marcus investigated. The room was smaller than the central chamber, lined with shelves that held an eclectic collection of objects. And not just any objects, human objects. Books, actual paper books with Earth titles. Music recordings from Earth artists. A vintage compass. A child's toy, worn and faded. Photographs of Earth landscape cities, forests, oceans. I did not give you permission to enter this room. Marcus spun to find Sylvana in the doorway, her expression colder than he'd yet seen it. The door was open. I didn't know. This space is private. She stepped inside, and Marcus noticed how her posture had changed, becoming almost defensive. You will not enter it again without invitation. Why do you have all this human stuff? Marcus asked, too intrigued to back down. If Velothians think we're so inferior? Sylvana's silver eyes moved to the shelves, and for a moment her mask slipped. What Marcus saw underneath was complex longing, perhaps, or grief, or something he couldn't name. Because, she said quietly, not all Velothians share that prejudice. Once I did not. She picked up one of the photographs, studying it with an expression Marcus couldn't read. I spent 20 years as a cultural liaison to Earth. I lived in your cities, learned your languages, studied your art and philosophy. I found your species fascinating in its contradictions. What changed? She set the photograph down carefully. Politics, betrayal, the reminder that no matter how much one admires another culture, one's own society may never approve. She turned to face him. I was forced to choose between my career and my principles. I chose the latter. You defended humans, Marcus said slowly, understanding dawning. That's why you left the diplomatic corps. I argued against the trade restrictions that your government considers oppressive. I presented evidence that Velothian fears about human expansion were exaggerated. I was not subtle in my criticism of the Council's xenophobic policies. A bitter smile touched her lips. In Velothian society, such outspokenness from someone of my generation is considered disgraceful. Dignity demands quiet compliance. Marcus looked at this woman, this alien who was 33 years older than him, who had sacrificed her career to defend his species, who collected human artifacts in secret like precious treasures. She was nothing like what he'd assumed. So you saved me, he said, not just to prevent a political incident, but because— Do not romanticize my actions, Sylvana interrupted, her walls snapping back into place. I have my reasons, and they serve my purposes. Sentiment does not factor into it. But Marcus had seen behind the mask now, however briefly. He'd seen the collection, heard the softness in her voice when she spoke of Earth. Whatever she claimed, there was more to this than cold calculation. Why did you resign 17 years ago, specifically? He asked. What happened? Sylvana's expression shuddered completely. That is not a topic for discussion. She moved past him toward the door. It is late. I suggest you rest. Tomorrow, we will establish the parameters of our arrangement. Sylvana, good night, Marcus. This time, the dismissal was absolute. Marcus watched her go and looked back at the room full of Earth treasures. 17 years of isolation. A collection that spoke of deep fascination with humanity. A woman who had destroyed her own career to defend his species. What had happened 17 years ago? And why did he suddenly care so much about the answer? Marcus returned to his quarters, but sleep deluded him. Through his window, he watched Velotha Prime's 3 moons rise in sequence, painting the mountains in shades of silver, blue, and pale green. Somewhere in this strange house built into a cliff, his wife, his owner, his savior, he didn't even know what to call her, was probably awake too. Surrounded by her loneliness and her secrets, he was trapped here, legally bound to a woman he didn't know, on a planet that wasn't his home. But for the first time since the crash, Marcus felt something other than anger or fear. He felt curious. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something that might eventually become understanding. The morning brought an unwelcome surprise. Marcus woke to find Sylvana standing in his doorway, her expression as impassive as ever. But her posture suggesting this visit was not by choice. The crystal ascension begins tonight, she announced without preamble. As my bonded partner, your attendance is mandatory. Marcus sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes. I thought you avoided social gatherings. I do. However, this is different. She entered the room, carrying what appeared to be formal clothing. The crystal ascension occurs once every 3 years, when our 3 moons align perfectly. Attendance is not merely expected, it is law for anyone of rank. Absence would invite questions about the legitimacy of our bond. Marcus took the clothing she offered, a tunic and trousers in deep charcoal, with subtle threading that caught the light. The fabric felt smoother than silk against his fingers. Questions like whether you actually married me, or just kidnapped a human. Questions that could result in your return to custody and subsequent execution, Sylvana replied coolly. So yes, we will attend. We will present a united front, and you will behave in a manner that does not embarrass me. I'll try to contain my natural charm, Marcus said dryly. Something flickered in her eyes, amusement maybe. But it was gone before he could be sure. She spent the next several hours drilling him on Velothian customs and protocols. How to greet officials of various ranks. Which gestures were respectful and which were offensive. The proper way to eat, drink, and moved through a formal gathering. Marcus's head swam with information, but Silvana was a patient teacher, correcting his mistakes without condescension. "Why does it matter so much?" he asked during a break. "What I do, I mean. You've made it clear you don't care what Velothian society thinks." Silvana was silent for a long moment, standing by the window and looking out at the mountains. "Because appearances matter, even in isolation. If our bond is questioned, it is not merely you who faces consequences. It is also Earth's trade agreements, the delicate peace we've maintained. Sometimes, Marcus, we perform for the sake of those who have no voice in the matter." There was weight in her words. Layers of meaning Marcus was only beginning to understand. They arrived at the festival grounds as the sun began its descent. The location was a vast plateau carved into the mountain, with platforms at various heights connected by bridges of crystal. Already, hundreds of Velothians had gathered, their formal robes shimmering in shades of blue, violet, and silver. Bioluminescent decorations hung in the air, held aloft by some technology Marcus didn't understand. The moment they stepped onto the main platform, conversation died. Every glowing eye turned toward them, toward Silvana Theron and her human husband. Marcus felt Silvana stiffen beside him, though her expression remained neutral. She moved forward with her head high, one hand extended slightly. It took Marcus a moment to understand. She was offering her arm in the formal gesture she taught him. He took it, trying to ignore the whispers that erupted in their wake. "Ignore them," Silvana murmured, so quietly only he could hear. "They are beneath our concern." But Marcus could see the cost of that indifference. The way her jaw tightened, the rigid control in her shoulders. This woman, who had lived in isolation for 17 years, was forcing herself back into the society that had rejected her, and she was doing it for him, for the bond that protected him. They moved through the crowd, and Marcus noticed how other Velothians parted before them, not out of respect, but as if proximity might contaminate them. The whispers grew louder, actually brought the human desperation. To bind herself to such a creature, what did she expect after the incident? Silvana Theron. The voice cut through the murmurs, sharp and authoritative. An older Velothian male approached, his robes marked with insignia that suggested high rank. His skin held the deep blue of aged Velothians, and his eyes glowed with an intensity that made Marcus's skin prickle. "Magistrate Corvus," Silvana replied, her voice perfectly controlled. "How unexpected to see you at a cultural celebration." "I thought you preferred judicial chambers." "I prefer to ensure our laws are upheld," Corvus replied, his gaze sliding to Marcus with obvious distaste. "Including the laws regarding legitimate bonding." "There are. Questions about your arrangement." "Questions from whom?" "From the council. A bonding invoked under the right of salvage requires certain conditions to be met. Cohabitation, public acknowledgement, evidence of genuine partnership." His eyes narrowed. "Some believe you claimed this human merely to cause controversy, to thumb your nose at society one final time." Marcus felt Silvana's arm tense beneath his hand, but her expression never changed. "My reasons for bonding are my own concern, Magistrate. Unless you have legal grounds to challenge it?" "Not yet," Corvus said, the threat clear. "But understand this, Silvana the Council watches. One misstep, one indication that this bond is a farce, and your human will be returned to face justice. And this time, no right of salvage will save him." He turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving a wake of tension. "Charming fellow," Marcus muttered. "He has been trying to prove me unfit for society since I resigned," Silvana said quietly. "He views my presence here as an affront. Is he right? Are we giving them ammunition?" Silvana looked at him then, really looked at him, and Marcus saw something vulnerable beneath the cold exterior. "I do not know," she admitted. "I have not attempted to appear bonded in any genuine sense." I do not know if I remember how. The music began then haunting tones that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Around them, bonded pairs moved onto the dance platforms, beginning the traditional movements Sylvana had taught him that afternoon. "Dance with me," Marcus said suddenly. Sylvana blinked. "That is not necessary." "Yes, it is. You said we need to appear genuinely bonded. So let's give them something to see." He extended his hand, palm up in the formal request gesture. "Dance with me, Sylvana." For a long moment, she simply stared at his outstretched hand. Then, slowly, she placed her palm against his dot. The contact sent a jolt through Marcus's skin, warm against his, her fingers strong and steady. They moved onto the dance platform, and Marcus tried to remember everything she'd taught him about the traditional movements. It started formal, proper the prescribed steps of the Crystal Ascension dance. But as the music shifted, becoming more complex, Marcus found himself improvising, adapting the human dance styles he knew to match Velothian patterns. Sylvana followed without missing a beat, her movements fluid and graceful. And then something changed. It might have been the way the moonlight caught her silver-tinged skin, or the way her expression softened as she lost herself in the music. Or maybe it was simply that Marcus suddenly saw her not as his captor or his owner, but as a woman who had sacrificed everything to stand by her principles. A woman who was beautiful in her strength and her loneliness. The dance brought them closer, their bodies nearly touching as the pattern required. Marcus could feel her warmth, smell the faint scent that clung to her, something like cinnamon and starlight. Her eyes met his, silver and luminous, and for a breathless moment, the entire festival disappeared. It was just them, moving together, and Marcus felt his heart race in a way that had nothing to do with the physical exertion. The music ended. They stood facing each other, both breathing harder than the dance warranted. Around them, polite applause rippled through the crowd, but Marcus barely heard it. "That was," Sylvana started, then stopped, seeming uncharacteristically at a loss for words. "Yeah," Marcus agreed quietly. "It was." They were interrupted by the ceremonial lighting, the moment when the three moons aligned and cast their combined light onto the crystal formations, creating a display of prismatic beauty that took Marcus's breath away. The entire plateau lit up in rainbow colors, the crystals singing with some harmonic resonance. Beside him, Sylvana tilted her face up to the light, and Marcus saw her expression soften into something almost peaceful. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hand. She didn't pull away. They stood like that as the ceremony continued, hands clasped, watching light dance across crystal. And Marcus realized something that should have terrified him, but instead felt oddly inevitable. He was beginning to care for her. This alien woman who was 3 decades older, who had owned him under law, who was cold and controlled and utterly alone. He was starting to see past all of that to the person underneath, the principled rebel who had sacrificed everything, the secret romantic who collected earth treasures, the lonely soul who had chosen isolation over compromise. As the moons began to drift out of alignment, and the festival slowly wound down, Sylvana finally turned to him. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for the dance, for all of this." "We're bonded," Marcus replied, squeezing her hand gently. "That's what partners do, right? They support each other." Something in her expression cracked, just slightly. "I had forgotten," she whispered, "what that feels like." They returned to the estate in comfortable silence, both lost in thought. When they arrived, Sylvana paused before retreating to her own quarters. "Marcus," she said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "Would you? That is, tomorrow, would you join me for morning meal? Not as part of our arrangement, but simply as companions?" Marcus smiled. "I'd like that." As he lay in bed that night, Marcus stared at the ceiling and tried to process what was happening. He'd been trapped here, forced into a marriage with a woman he didn't know, on a planet that wasn't his home. He should be planning escape, should be resenting every moment. Instead, he found himself thinking about silver eyes and graceful movements, about a hand holding his beneath moonlight, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this forced arrangement might become something real. Something worth staying for. In her own quarters. Sylvana stood by her window, her hand still warm from where Marcus had held it. She had not expected this, had not planned for the possibility that the human she'd claimed might become something more than a political necessity. She had saved him to serve a purpose. But somewhere between the trial and the dance, between cold calculation and warm connection, something had shifted, and for the first time in 17 years, Sylvana Theron felt the stirring of something she'd thought long dead, hope.